When it comes to vSphere networking, there's nothing more core than the vSphere standard switch. So what exactly is the vSphere standard switch and what are its capabilities? That's what you'll learn in this lesson. First off, the vSphere standard switch is what connects virtual machines together and what connects your virtual machines to the physical network. It's the vSphere standard switch that has the ability to move layer 2 traffic, just like a traditional network switch would, between virtual machines internally on each of your ESXi hosts. This means that two virtual machines on the same network that are both on the same ESXi host can exchange traffic. The traffic never has to leave the host or go to a router as long as those two virtual machines are on the same network. Now, we'll be spending a lot of time in this module in the vSphere client, configuring vSphere standard switches and other virtual network objects. However, for those of you who are like me and would really like a visual of exactly how this works, let's go through this diagram. If we start off with an ESXi host, yes, that's the host right there in that rectangle on the screen. In most cases, this is going to be a physical ESXi host in a data center. On top of that host in the vSphere hypervisor, let's say that you're running two virtual machines. These virtual machines have what they call virtual network interface cards, also known as vNICs or virtual NICs. Those virtual NICs are going to connect down to a port group. A port group is a management concept, and it's going to be part of a vSphere standard switch. The default port group on a vSphere standard switch is the virtual machine network, also known as the VM network. Once these two virtual machines are created and their vNICs are connected to the vSphere standard switch, they can communicate with one another virtually, all inside this ESXi host. Now, you might be wondering, how do these virtual machines and the applications inside communicate with the outside network? Now, that outside network doesn't have to be the internet. It could just be another ESXi host or other network services that are running on the local area network. Well, the vSphere standard switch would have what they call an uplink. That uplink connection would go to a PNIC or a physical network interface card on this physical ESXi host. That physical network interface card would then be connected to a physical switch, just like any other physical server in the data center. From there, the physical switch, of course, would be connected to the local area network, and then from there, perhaps to a router that goes out to the internet. With that visualization in mind, let's go through a few vSphere networking terms. The first one being vSwitch. A vSwitch is commonly called a vSS or a vSphere standard switch. In our next module, we'll cover another option, which is called a vSphere distributed switch. Now, standard switches still have some more advanced networking features, such as traffic shaping, network interface card teaming, security policies, and Cisco Discovery Protocol support. You can have up to 4,096 switch ports per host, with 1,016 of those being active, and up to 512 port groups per switch. You can even have up to 16 vSphere standard or distributed switches per host. The next term here being VM port group, or just port group. As you'll see when we go to the vSphere client, there is a default port group called simply VM network. That's the virtual machine port group where virtual machines that are created connect by default to the vSphere standard switch. Port groups are very much a management concept, as you can configure features like traffic shaping, teaming, and failover on a port group basis. The next term is port. Every virtual switch has a number of virtual ports. So just like a physical switch where you plug in a physical network interface cable, you're going to be connecting a virtual network interface card to a virtual port on a virtual switch. And then we have VM kernel port, also known as VMK. The ESXi host itself needs to connect to the network for management functionality, and it uses VMK interfaces with VMK0 being the default VM kernel port. This is where the IP address will be configured for the ESXi host for management. And then we have the management network. You can think of this as the virtual port group that's created by default and cannot be removed, where the VM kernel interface resides on the virtual switch. And then we have what are called uplinks or VM NICs. And VM NICs really map to the physical network adapters or the PNICs that connect to the physical network. An ESXi host might have one or multiple physical network interface cards or physical adapters, and each one of those physical adapters is going to map to what's called a VM NIC on the ESXi host. Those VM NICs might serve as the uplink for virtual machines to access the physical network, or you could have one or multiple VM NICs in use for management of that host and for network redundancy. And finally, vNIC or Virtual Network Interface Card. This is the virtual network adapter that by default will be configured on each of your virtual machines. And you're not limited to just a single virtual machine network adapter or vNIC. You can have up to 10 virtual network adapters on each virtual machine. Thank you for sticking with me through this introductory information on the vSphere standard switch and vSphere networking terms. I can promise you that throughout the rest of this module, we'll be spending all of our time in the vSphere client configuring vSphere networking.